Remember how they talked about making your home a mission field?
Yes.
Well, they really get into the specifics of how they do that. They open their home to people.
Oh.
They volunteer. They prioritize their spiritual growth. It's not just talk, they're really living it out.
It's a powerful reminder that marriage can be about so much more than just our own happiness.
Now, let's shift gears a bit, talk about finances. This is often a tough one for couples.
Yeah, money matters.
Ibi and Mina, they get it. They're very open about their own struggles, especially in those early years.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
They emphasize communication, transparency, no keeping financial secrets.
Being on the same page is so important.
Right.
If you're not, it can breed resentment.
Absolutely. And they're big believers in budgeting, living within your means.
Right.
They share some of their tips too, like buying groceries in bulk, cooking at home.
Practical stuff makes a difference.
They also believe that financial challenges, they can actually strengthen a marriage.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
It's about facing those challenges together.
As a team.
Right, not letting money drive a wedge between you.
Working together toward a shared vision, a shared goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Supporting each other along the way.
Even celebrating those small victories, like sticking to a budget for a whole month.
It's a big, big deal.
And, it's amazing. They bring their faith into this too.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about tithing even when things were really tight financially because they trusted that God would provide.
That's powerful.
It's a reminder that ultimately our finances, well, they're in God's hands.
It's just your perspective, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of positive stuff, building a strong foundation, communicating well, navigating finances, but let's get real about the inevitable negativity and conflict that come up in every marriage. How do Ibi and Mina address that?
Well, remember that negativity bias we talked about earlier?
Yeah, how our brains are wired for the negative.
It's a real thing, and it can impact relationships in a big way. We have to be so intentional about focusing on the positive.
But it's easy to get sucked into that negativity spiral,
They offer some really practical tips, like practicing gratitude.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Focusing on the good things.
Exactly, and focusing on solutions instead of just dwelling on the problems.
I like that. It's a more proactive approach.
And choosing to speak kindly, even when you're upset.
Okay, that's a tough one, but important.
It is, and they talk about fighting fair, too.
Right. We touched on that earlier.
It's about remembering that you're on the same team, even when you're disagreeing.
It can be so easy to slip into that attack mode.
They have those ground rules, remember? No name calling, taking breaks.
Those are so helpful.
Right. It's about respecting each other, even when you're disagreeing. And you know what else they talk about a lot? Forgiveness. In any marriage, there will be hurts.
For sure.
Holding on to that anger, it doesn't do anyone any good.
Forgiveness is so essential for healing, for moving on.
And they talk about it being a process, not just a one-time thing.
It takes time.
They share this powerful story about a time when they had to work through a big hurt in their own marriage.
I can only imagine.
It's a reminder that even when things get really messy, there's still hope for healing.
For restoration.
Exactly. And of course, they connect it back to their faith. God forgives us, so we should extend that same grace to each other.
Now, this next part is super fascinating. They get into those unique challenges and blessings, I guess, that come from the differences between men and women.
It's one of my favorite parts of the book.
Because it's true. Men and women, we're just wired differently. And those differences can lead to all sorts of misunderstanding, frustrations if we're not careful.
They explore the biological differences, the psychological differences.
I'm glad they're not shying away from those topics. It's so refreshing to hear a couple talk about these things openly.
And you know what? They make the point that these differences, they're not a bad thing. They can actually make a marriage stronger.
I love that perspective.
If you learn to appreciate those differences, leverage them.
Like how our strengths and weaknesses can complement each other.
Exactly. They share examples from their own marriage, like how they've adapted their communication styles to understand each other's needs better.
It's a good reminder that we can't expect our spouse to think and act exactly like we do.
We have to meet each other halfway.
Be willing to adapt, to compromise.
They also talk about celebrating those differences, recognizing that they bring richness to the relationship.
So it's about seeing those differences as a strength, not a source of conflict. I like that.
And of course, they connect it back to their faith, talking about how God created us male and female, each with unique qualities,
To complement each other.
Exactly. Our differences can actually draw us closer, make our marriages stronger.
Now let's talk about intimacy. It's a big part of any healthy marriage.
Absolutely. And they don't just focus on the physical either. They talk about how to deepen connection on an emotional level, intellectual, even spiritual.
So it's about more than just sex. It's about really knowing your partner on a deep level.
Exactly. They talk about communication, vulnerability, being present with each other.
Creating that safe space where you can be yourselves.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts and feelings. Feel seen and heard. That's so important.
And they emphasize that intimacy doesn't just happen, It requires effort.
You have to be intentional about it.
Right. They share some practical tips, like having regular date nights, trying new things together, even making time for those small, everyday moments of connection.
I like that. It's about recognizing that intimacy isn't just about grand gestures. It's about those small, everyday moments that build a strong foundation over time. Those little things we do for each other, those shared moments of laughter, the quiet conversations, all of it.
And don't forget physical affection. Holding hands, cuddling, kissing, those little acts can go a long way.
Because physical touch, it releases those feel-good hormones. It helps us feel connected. But what about couples who maybe have different comfort levels with physical touch? Do they talk about that?
They do acknowledge that. They encourage couples to be open and honest with each other about their needs, their preferences, finding that balance that works for both.
It's about respect.
Exactly. And they talk about how their early years, being far from family and friends, it actually helped them cultivate a deep sense of intimacy.
Because they had to be each other's everything.
Their support system, their confidant.
Their best friend. It's a reminder that even in the midst of challenges, you can actually grow closer as a couple.
Now, there's this topic that a lot of people shy away from.
What's that?
Sex. But E.B. and Mina, they address it head on.
Good. Because it's a natural part of marriage. And it can be a source of great joy, great connection, but also frustration if it's not approached in a healthy way. What do they say about it?
They talk about communication, of course, being open and honest with each other about needs and desires.
So creating that safe space where you can really talk about these things.
Right. And they emphasize that a healthy sexual relationship, it's built on trust, intimacy, that emotional connection.
It's not just about the physical act. It's about feeling loved, desired by your partner. What about when, those desires aren't always aligned, or life gets in the way, you're stressed, and intimacy takes a back seat?
They acknowledge those challenges. They encourage couples to be patient with each other, understanding.
Because things ebb and flow over time, right?
Exactly. It's not about expecting fireworks every single time.
It's about keeping those lines of communication open.
Right. And being willing to work together, find solutions.
So a more holistic approach to intimacy, recognizing all the different factors that play a role.
And they talk about prioritizing quality time together, both in and out of the bedroom.
Those small, everyday moments of connection.
They made a difference.
Absolutely. And, as always, they connect this back to their faith.
They talk about how God designed sex to be this beautiful expression of love.
Within the context of marriage.
Right. It's about deepening your connection, experiencing the fullness of love.
Okay, so we've talked about communication, intimacy, navigating differences. What about personal growth? How do they address that?
It's a big one. They're huge advocates for supporting each other's dreams.
Even if those dreams change. Because we all evolve as we go through life.
Absolutely. It's not about holding each other back. It's about encouraging each other to become the best versions of yourselves.
Do they have any examples of how they did this in their own marriage?
Oh, definitely. Mina was a stay-at-home mom for a while.
Okay.
But as the kids got older, she felt this pull to go back to work, pursue her career.
And EB was supportive.
He was. He recognized her happiness was important, and he encouraged her.
That's awesome. It's about mutual support, empowerment.
Exactly. And they talk about creating space for each other to grow, individually, but also as a couple.
So giving each other the freedom to explore new interests. But doesn't that get tricky? Balancing personal growth with nurturing the relationship.
They address that. It's about communication, being willing to compromise.
Making sure you're not neglecting the relationship for the sake of individual pursuits.
Right. They believe personal growth should ultimately make the relationship stronger.
It's about celebrating each other's achievements, offering encouragement when things get tough, being each other's biggest cheerleaders. I love that.
Now let's talk about forgiveness.
Oof, a big one.
Because, let's face it, in any marriage, there are going to be mistakes. We're human.
Forgiveness isn't always easy. Sometimes those hurts run deep.
They get that. They talk about forgiveness being a journey. It takes time, effort, but it's worth it.
It's about choosing to let go of the pain, moving forward with love and compassion. But how do you know when you've truly forgiven someone? Because sometimes it feels like you're just burying those feelings and they're just going to come back up later.
It's a great question. They talk about forgiveness being a choice you make, not just a feeling.
So you don't have to wait for those feelings to disappear.
Exactly. You make a conscious decision to let go, even if those feelings are still there.
Wow.
And it's a process. You might have to forgive your spouse multiple times for the same thing, you know?
As you're working through those feelings.
They even share a story from their own marriage about a time when they had to forgive each other for something really big.
That's brave of them to share something so personal.
It shows their humility, you know? And they offer some really helpful advice for couples who are struggling to forgive, like focusing on understanding each other's perspectives,
Okay.
communicating openly, maybe even seeking guidance from a counselor or mentor.
You don't have to go through this alone.
And of course, they bring it back to their faith. God forgives us, so we should strive to do the same for each other.
It's a beautiful concept. Forgiveness is about freeing ourselves from those burdens.
Opening ourselves to love and healing.